Hello, everyone, and welcome back from lunch. My name is John Weathers. I will be facilitating the afternoon session here today. A couple quick housekeeping things. Please remember comments kept to a 3-minute period. There will be a 30-second warning when that time runs. Also, please keep in mind that we're endeavoring to have a new conversation. If you want to reiterate or reiterate something that someone else has said, please do so in the chat. Also place questions in the chat. And also if you are an alternate that's going to be coming to the table, please notify us. And the primary, please turn your video off when we do that. Just real quick, Jalil Mustafa Bishop will be sitting at the table in place of Richard Haas. So I will hand it off to the department.
Thank you, John, and welcome back, everyone. I'd like to pose a question to the committee. Do we feel that we have heard from all of you on the comments that you have in reference to the GE question, or do we need to have continued conversation?
Anyone?
I suggest we go ahead and go on to question number 5. Thank you, Rich, for sharing that question. The Higher Education Act, as amended, contains a number of programs designed to provide targeted relief to borrowers. For instance, we have forgiveness programs for borrowers who pursue public service, whose schools close, whose schools engaged in misconduct, or borrowers who have a total and permanent disability. We also have forgiveness programs for borrowers after they've made payments for a certain period of time. But the student aid programs serve a large number of Americans. With 44 million student loan borrowers, it's helpful to receive input on additional situations where a borrower may be facing struggles that are not captured by an existing program, even if they would be deserving of relief under the broad structure of the Higher Education Act. Borrowers who experience hardship with respect to their student loans may have certain ways to reduce or delay loan payments or seek forgiveness on their loans. Yet borrowers may continue to experience hardship in ways that the current student loan system does not adequately address. The department would like your feedback on the following question. What are potential types of hardships that borrowers continue to face, and how might we address those cases of hardship?
Okay, let's open this up for discussion. I see Vincent Andrews. Please go ahead, sir. You're muted. Vincent, you're on mute.
Oh, there we go. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Yeah. So I had a few points that I jotted down earlier that I thought really applied to waiver distribution in general. One of the points John had brought up earlier related to how disabled, injured, incapacitated, even elderly individuals who face substantial hardship, there's really no streamlined way for family members to, I guess, do anything in the instance that somebody is really injured and they can't get online and apply for deferment or forbearance. And under some of these circumstances, people lose their ability to ever be fully employed again. So there should be some consideration made regarding the waiver about what we can do for individuals who reasonably can be expected to gain full working capacity in the future. Another one that I had was hardships that might be created due to waiver distribution. So again, I kind of touched on it yesterday. Individuals struggling the most may have minimal benefit to a blanket waiver. In addition, blanket waiver may increase the payment of some borrowers. So the equity between what they owe and what they make, a borrower who maybe owes 30 and has to make a payment of 0 may end up, in fact, having to make a payment of a few $100s if they were to get some of that waived. The next one was debt prevents individuals from pursuing professional training in their education that they needed. Someone mentioned earlier, related to small business owners. A lot of people don't go back to school and get the training and education they need to be successful in things that they actually want to do because, I mean, they're really afraid to get more debt in most cases. And I actually know people who have even had their transcripts and their degrees withheld because they have student balances that haven't been paid. And then the last one, there should be benchmark incentives, or I think some idea of benchmark incentives for high stress, low paying occupations like teachers, nurses, who traditionally have high rates of turnover and are likely to leave their fields in the first 2 to 3 years if they aren't enjoying it. I think some sort of like benchmark waivers might be some good incentive for people to stay in positions that are well needed.
Vincent. Angelica, please.
Okay. I recognize that the central theme of this query pertains to financial strain, but the misalignment between the previous question, or question number 3, and this question, question number 5, underscores the urgency of the department's clarification regarding the definition of financial value. Because question number 5, this question acknowledges there are higher education programs that provide quality education, yet external factors significantly affect borrowers. It is important to highlight the adverse influence that student loan debt has on credit ratings, which in turn impacts individuals' ability to purchase homes, vehicles, and most crucially, their credit worthiness of employment. Student loans adversely affect credit scores, amplifying financial stress due to their influence on debt-to-income ratios. In light of this, I request that the department review its procedures and policies related to the debt reporting to consumer reporting agencies. And because of creditworthiness employment, I propose that the department consider debt waivers based on job market dynamics as well as economic factors.
Ashley?
I want to follow up on what she had said. From my personal experience with having these loans for 20 years, I also run a small business. My husband and I run a photography studio. We have never been able to get a business loan because of the student loans on our credit report, because our income to debt ratio is too great. This also includes our private loans, which may not be considered under this, but it is one of the reasons why we've never been able to get a mortgage. We've never been able to get a small business loan. And it all comes down to the fact that we've had these student loans on our credit report for 20 years. I also know several teachers that have left teaching because they just accumulated so many student loans and they were paid. There's a lot of other factors in there in the teaching and the red tape, but it really came down to the fact that they owed so much money on their student loans and were not making enough to make it worth it for them to stay in the profession.
Thank you, Ashley. I'd like to make a note that Jordan Nellums is going to be coming in at the table, and Jada Sanford will be sitting out with her video off for currently enrolled post-secondary education students. And next, I'd like to ask Lane Thompson to speak.
Thanks, John. In terms of hardship, I just want to talk about incarcerated borrowers. We incarcerate more people in this country than any other nation on earth, and a lot of those folks have student debt. I used to work as a student loan coach, and in that program, we had a small dollar lender who went into the prisons and did these credit building loans. It's a really cool product. But she found that a lot of folks that she worked with had student debt and didn't have any way to address it. They didn't have access to the internet. They couldn't stay on the phone long enough to talk to their servicer. There just wasn't any option for them. So I really think that that's also a pretty discrete and identifiable group. Folks who are currently incarcerated, or even folks who have been incarcerated in their lifetimes. Definitely a group that I want to make sure we consider.
Thank you. Next, Ms. Taylor.
So I'd like to call attention to some of the other forms of debt or hardship that are not currently recognized within the student loan system that often come up when low-income people are talking to a legal aid attorney. Folks often cite the cost of medical care and mental health costs, even where they have potentially a low dollar IDR amount, can still prevent them from being able to pay, from being in the position where they have to choose between paying for their medical debt or mental health costs and paying for their student loan debt. In addition, childcare costs are extremely expensive in this country. They have risen at faster than the rate of inflation, but childcare costs are not included. That includes the cost of daycare, aftercare, summer care, holiday care, medical care for children, which is exacerbated if you have a child with special needs. And just by way of example, the U.S. Department of Agriculture estimates that raising a child through the age of 17 costs $200,333 and $610 on average. In addition, we hear from borrowers who struggle with balancing the costs of caregiving for aging parents and other dependent adults. This also may impact their ability to maintain employment as well. So they may have income, but that income is being drawn down by these other expenses. And in addition, and perhaps most significantly, there are significant regional differences in the cost of living that are not taken fully into account by the IDR plans. This means that some borrowers who are low-income borrowers are in the horrible position of having to choose between paying for their housing costs or paying for their student loan debt. And so I think all of these factors should be considered when we're thinking about hardship. And I would just like to lift up what Lane said about incarcerated borrowers as well, that oftentimes they have no way of contacting their servicers. And the department could find information and discharge the debt of folks who have been incarcerated for 5 years or more.
Next, Yael.
Thank you. I won't belabor repeating what Kara and others have just said. I do also want to emphasize the importance of providing relief for people who are incarcerated, and also flag that family members of people who are incarcerated, particularly women of color, bear a significant financial burden associated with having incarcerated family members, and that should also be taken into consideration. One thing that I want to note as well is that I think here too, the department should be looking for indicia of hardship that can be ascertained based on data that's available to the federal government, including other agencies, to minimize the burden on people, sort of proving this hardship. And to that end, I think that the department should consider as a hardship when folks have had, administrative garnishment and their EITC withheld, which is, I realize, not a problem, the focus of this rulemaking, but it's a big problem. And I think it's something that the department should consider in the context of identifying people who are facing hardships. And I'd like to add to the list as well, disproportionate private student loan debt, particularly student loan debt that's associated with institutional debt from for-profit schools and the like, that's something the department should be taking into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Quick note, Scott Waterman is going to be coming in for Kira Taylor at the table in place of Kira Taylor for legal assistant organizations that represent students or borrowers. Next up, Ed Boltz.
Thank you. I would like to reference that and again thank that the department did a very good job. Not a great job, but it's within the limits of what can be done in these sorts of things with the student loan guidance that was issued with the regarding bankruptcy discharges. I would hope that whatever rulemaking can come out of this would would look towards that perhaps, but also reference that, because thus far in the almost 1 year that we've been working to get student loan discharges in bankruptcies, the department's attorneys at the Department of Justice and the assistant U.S. attorneys have often stood athwart the department's own goals, despite being the actual client who directs this. So to the extent that anything can be incorporated regarding that in these rulemaking, I think that would strengthen the hand of both the department and consumer advocates in seeking student loan discharges for people who are in bankruptcy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, Jordan.
Yes, thank you. Well, I wanted to give you all my personal story. So when I first decided to attend college, I realized that I would have to rely on student loans to attend college. And I was adamant that I did not want my parents to be in a bad situation to support me in college, but ultimately didn't care what I wanted, and they emphasized that they would support me and my twin at all cost. And due to their commitment, my father, who never went to college himself, took out Parent Plus loans for me and my twin. And as of today, my father has nearly $100,000 in Parent Plus loans, and is not expected to finish paying off the loans until the age of 84. And recently commented how he thinks he'll end up having to work for the rest of his life. And I think that should be considered a hardship. And in its recent public statements regarding the introduction of the SAVE plan and why Parent Plus loan borrowers were excluded from that plan, the department makes the following assumptions. The department states that many Parent Plus loan borrowers are more likely to have a clear picture of whether or not their loan is affordable. And I think this can be further from the truth, as my dad never attended college and my dad was not familiar with the student loan process, which I'm sure is a similar experience that so many different first-generation college students and their families experience. Additionally, my father was never aware that his Social Security benefits could be at risk as well. The second assumption that the department makes is because Parent Plus loan borrowers do not directly benefit from the educational attainment of the degree or potential achieved, the Parent Plus loan will not facilitate investments that increase the parent's own earnings. This, I also agree, is flawed. I attained a college education because of my dad's support in taking out a Parent Plus loan. The department states that parents specifically do not benefit from their children getting a college degree. I argue they do. If they are first-generation college students, you have opened your family to the ability to dream bigger, and in some cases break generational curses. As the Century Foundation noted in one of their most recent reports, Parent Plus poses a dilemma for Black and Latino families in particular, who may view higher education as one of the only available opportunities to ensure that their child achieves upward mobility. Additionally, many Parent Plus loan borrowers assume that their kids will be able to help them pay for their Parent Plus loans.
30 seconds, Jordan.
I call on the department to reconsider its previous statements regarding Parent Plus loans and include them in the SAVE plan and any plans that cancel student loan debt, such as canceling debt of Parent Plus loans after parents make payments toward their loans for the amount of years that their students were enrolled in school, as any years beyond when their child was enrolled should be considered as creating hardships. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. Quick note, David Ramirez is going to be coming in, sitting at the table in place of primary Ashley Pizzuti for student loan borrowers who attend programs of 2 years or less. And next, Wisdom.
Thank you. I just wanted to share some stories from members of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in terms of the hardships that are impacting them. Sheila S. writes, my debt to income ratio is so disproportionate that my risk for homeownership is not likely. Who will give a mortgage to somebody who is nearly $500K in student loan debt? Trina W. Owing an amount of student debt is stressful. I'm fearful that my kids may be saddled with my debt when I die. I'm a disabled veteran and I have to keep a job just to pay student loan debt. It's hard. She's saddled with $81,000 in student debt. Valerie P. I'm currently the primary caregiver for my mother, husband, who are both disabled. My husband has been recently diagnosed with lung cancer. I've taken on 2 jobs in order to make ends meet in the payment for my student loans, which has taken time away from me being able to care for my family. Valerie has $200K in student loans. Mary Ann B, who has $96K in student loans. I wanted to provide for my family. I did not make sufficient salary and worked 2 jobs. I was a mother of 4 children and a grandma. I have been paying my loans, but I was told that my last payment would be when I'm 95 years old. I'm 70 years old. Asia M, who has $300K in student loans. I'm unable to launch a real estate business, although my job pays me a decent salary. I usually live paycheck to paycheck and I'm unable to amass savings. I'm afraid to start trying to have a baby with my husband because we are burdened by the huge debt and are not financially stable enough. There are a multitude of key issues that are here and hardships that people face, but identifying some of these issues such as job loss and the reduction of income, solutions that the department can take in terms of cancellation, but also adjustments to IDR that folks have mentioned already. I want to also highlight the health issues that happen with student loans. Health problems, medical emergencies can lead to high medical bills and reducing the ability to pay student loans. We know that 53% of high debt student loan borrowers have experienced depression because of debt. 9 out of 10 borrowers experience significant anxiety due to their student loan debt. 1 in 15 student loan borrowers surveyed have said they've considered suicide due to their student loan debt. The department can take action to explore medical hardship deferment and specialized loan forgiveness programs for borrowers facing these health-related financial difficulties. Also, identifying public service and nonprofit employees.
30 seconds, Wisdom.
Borrowers working in public service or nonprofit sectors may face lower salaries compared to their student loan debt. The department can expand public service loan forgiveness programs by lowering the required number of qualifying payments and simplifying the forgiveness process, encouraging more borrowers to pursue careers in these sectors. Thank you.
Wisdom. Next, Scott Buchanan.
Yes, we're talking about other sort of discrete populations that are experiencing hardship. And while this isn't a big population, it's one that we've talked with the department with for many years, is for borrowers who are reported as missing persons. We don't have consistent guidance on how to treat these loans across loan programs, and the ongoing outreach to service or recover on those loans creates a lot of pain for families who are already going through a terrible issue of having someone in their family who is a missing person. And I think it would be important for the department to consider in regulation clarifying practices and also determine when we decide to cancel these loans so that we're no longer pursuing loans and creating that distress for families on an ongoing fashion.
Thank you, Scott. Next, Scott Waterman.
Good afternoon. I wanted to provide a little context for discharging student loans because we do it all the time in bankruptcy. And in the bankruptcy world, in order to discharge a student loan, the debtor needs to demonstrate 3 things. Number 1, that they've acted in good faith. Number 2, that they have a current hardship. And number 3, that the hardship is going to continue through a substantial period of the repayment period for that loan. Now, recently, last year, November of 2022, Department of Justice tried to standardize that test. It's called the Bruner test, and issued a new directive. And I think we can learn from that because that new directive establishes certain standards and presumptions. And one presumption is if the debtor is having a hardship and is older than the age of 65, then there's a presumption that that hardship is going to continue so that that can be discharged. The second presumption is if the debtor's been unemployed for 5 of the last 10 years, they meet that presumption. And so I ask that perhaps the Department of Education can look at the Department of Justice's guidelines and use them as a basis for their decision to make it easier for people to discharge loans short of having to go to bankruptcy. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Next, Jalil.
Thank you. I want to underscore again, having the expansive view and expansive definitions of hardship. I think many of My fellow negotiators have shared great categories for us to think about. I think that it's particularly important for us to return back to the conversation of parent plus borrowers, because I think that there's I would say parent plus borrowers and graduate school borrowers. I think there's a argument that I can see continuously from the department that there's a risk of a moral hazard if we offer benefits to these two groups, because there's a notion that these two groups knew the loans that they were taking out, should have the means to handle the risk, that by somehow offering them benefits that can handle the real hardship that they're experiencing, that somehow would create a moral hazard where they would borrow more loan debt than they need. And I would really encourage the department, as you're hearing these stories being shared here today, as you're looking at the data, to really consider some of the moral hazard arguments that have been used to exclude particularly parent plus borrowers from past beneficial plans as we look forward at additional regulation. I also think that data is important here, but it's hard to capture hardship stories if you're only looking at quantitative outcome data. So I would encourage the department to look at research such as mine, the National Black Student Loan Study, where we actually captured the experiences of 2,000 Black borrowers. And I will share the data report and the data hub, where you can not only read the stories, you can listen to the audio, you can see the visualization of how these hardships are playing out when it comes to meeting people's basic needs. And then I will also put in a data request for the department to please submit to us some themes that you're receiving in the 27,000 comments that you have received around hardship that borrowers are experiencing. So you're already receiving a lot of this qualitative data. If you could pull out some of those hardship themes, that would also help us as we're trying to define hardship categories.
Thank you very much. Quick note, India Hextall will be replacing Wisdom Cole at the table for the Civil Rights Organization's constituency. Next, Jessica.
Thank you. I won't belabor it, but I just want to repeat what people said about Parent Plus borrowers. It's a real problem and people are really struggling. I was recently at a training for student loan non-attorney advocates, financial counselors, essentially, and the trainer said, look, if you can't afford your Parent Plus loans, like the worst case is you try and pay until you die. The best case is you try and pay until you get disabled enough to get a discharge. And I think that really reflects how people are feeling about Parent Plus loans, is that it's a hole that they just literally will never get out of. So I think it's really important that those are included in any kind of relief. And then I just wanted to bring up a topic that I referred to, but I think is very important in terms of the hardship here. I think the department is well aware of the student loan scammers, student loan document preparation companies, which are private companies that solicit payments from federal student loan borrowers in exchange often for false promises about loan cancellation or loan forgiveness. In reality, they just do a simple IDR application or a simple consolidation, even often when consolidation or IDR is against consolidation really is against the borrower's best interest. There are thousands, probably in the hundreds of thousands, definitely the tens of thousands of borrowers who've been enrolled in these companies. The FTC and many state attorneys general, including Yael's office, have taken action against them. But this is a widespread problem and I think really a basis for hardship. If you think about the millions of dollars that have poured into this industry, that's really money that should have gone to pay borrowers principal and interest. And I've had individual clients, for example, who believed that they were paying their federal student loans, in fact, were paying a private third-party company that was misrepresenting its role. And in one circumstance, I even tried to do an objection to administrative wage garnishment. The borrower did not understand that they were in default because they believed they've been paying their loans. So I think this problem is really pervasive and a real hardship for many people that I hope the department considers as a basis.
Thank you, Jessica. Next, Amber.
Hi, yeah. As a state official in New Mexico, and we're talking about borrowers, special populations with special hardships, I want to make sure that we mention New Mexico is home to 23 tribes and pueblos. Loans in these vast rural areas of our state are among the only opportunities that Native and rural students have to finance their education. I know from personal experience that, that the private lenders that Jessica was just talking about also have a presence in the rural areas and in the tribes and pueblos in New Mexico. And, borrowers from Native American communities, one thing that's special about them is that they often are committed to staying within their communities, to giving back, to serving their communities, and investing back in their communities. And I think that, that benefits all of us. It benefits the state. It definitely benefits the tribes and pueblos. And I think, that really could absolutely be said of our large Hispanic population as well in New Mexico. Now, I think it's easy to understand that the earning potential in our vast rural spaces and our tribes and pueblos in New Mexico, can be low. And access to information because of the lack of resources in our state is a real issue, even coming from the state itself. So that, that I think that this situation in a whole leads to a situation that really further compounds the historic harms that our Native American and Hispanic and really rural communities are already facing in New Mexico, and really holds them back from investing in themselves and their children. So I want to make sure that the needs of this particular group are also, kept in the foreground of the Department of Ed's understanding.
Thank you, Amber. Next up, David Ramirez.
Hi, everyone. I really want to concur all the statements about parent plus loans. I myself, as a student, I recently had to take out loans. Found myself very challenged in trying to understand the differences in benefits between unsubsidized federal loans and parent plus loans. And I had no real way to understand those differences, and relying on financial aid offices, even at an institution like UCLA, is very unreliable and very difficult, especially for first generation students of immigrants. I also really wanted to elevate for y'all the second generation immigrant students and those of children of undocumented immigrants, particularly since they don't even have access to parent plus loans, as a particular hardship that borrowers experience. The immigrant experience in America is trauma itself. And the added trauma of trying to navigate higher education and trying to navigate how to finance your education is disproportionate for those students. And so I just wanted to offer that.
Thank you, David. Couple quick notes. Lane Thompson is coming back to the table in place of Amber Gallup. And Richard Haas is coming back to the table for Jalil Mustafa Bishop. Next up, John Whitelaw.
Yes, thank you. I want to make a couple of points. One is sort of technical, but I think important. Remember, the standard for bankruptcy is undue hardship, and the standard here is a significantly less stringent test of hardship. So it seems to me anything that qualifies in bankruptcy automatically qualifies as hardship, but it's a one-way ratchet in the sense that just because it doesn't qualify for bankruptcy does not mean it wouldn't be a hardship. I also want to take a little detour. I think not quite as important as the substantive standards for hardship. And I know I am going to sound like a broken record on this, automation, automation, automation. It doesn't matter what the standards are if people have to suffer a difficult application process, they will not be able to navigate it. And that is particularly true for individuals with disabilities. I have spent much of my career doing working with individuals with disabilities who try to get waivers of Social Security overpayments. And one of the tests to get a waiver is to show financial hardship. And I cannot tell you the volumes of people who cannot navigate that process regardless of their substantive eligibility. So it is just, if not more important, to make sure that that you look for markers of hardship. I can give you one example. On Medicare and not subject to the enhanced Medicare premium because you are subject to IRMA. So everyone on Medicare is either going to be elderly or disabled. And I think that is again, I was thinking of things off the top of my head for what can we use for indicators of hardship. And then there are ways that at the quote top end, if there are some people that we think, yeah, this person's on Medicare, but they've got millions of dollars, they shouldn't be subject to hardship. There are ways to tinker with that at the back end, but that is not a difficult way to use as a simple mechanism for identifying people who are absolutely going to be undergoing some hardship. And I think there are lots of creative markers that we can use, by no means exclusively, but many markers that we could use to indicate for hardship. Receipt, and these are not exclusive, but receipt of any type of public assistance, Medicaid, SNAP, food stamps, any of those should be automatic indicators of hardship. And that is information that can be readily obtained through data exchanges that exist.
30 seconds, John.
And so I think we want a broad, expansive look, and then you really have to spend a lot of focus on looking for readily identifiable markers that people do not have to fill out applications for. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Next is Richard.
I'm glad John just brought up the importance of automation, which we hadn't really been talking about much today. It's actually what I wanted to chime in on also. I think it's important to remember that when it comes to hardship, it's often going to be people who are working multiple jobs, who are, we talk about discretionary income, but we don't always talk about discretionary time, discretionary faculties, language barriers. Having grown up in a single parent home with a parent who worked 3 jobs and disabled brother living in poverty, I can tell you that, my home, and my family were probably ones who would have missed opportunities that we weren't steered towards and supported through navigating. So I think it's sometimes mistakenly people blame others for which paths they don't pursue, towards achieving forgiveness and support. And I think it's important that we remember that it's often the people who need our help the most who we really have to make a conscious effort to reach out to and find. The more we can do to automate the process so families like those, can get the support they need, I think that's going to go a real distance when it comes to addressing that hardship.
Thank you. Lane, you're next.
Thanks. I have also been thinking about which kind of categories of borrowers are easily identifiable. And one that comes to mind for me is people without a permanent address. So people who are experiencing houselessness. In a lot of cases, these are also people who are defaulted, people who have not connected with their servicer in a long time. So I think there's a few different metrics there: address, most recent contact with servicer, and length of default that could all be pretty clear indications of hardship.
Thank you, Lane. Jessica, you're next.
I just wanted to echo John and Richard that I think largely the negotiators, I believe, are on the same page here, that we think that the more that can be automated, the better, and that the department should largely be focusing on areas in which it can use its understanding of hardships experienced by borrowers to enact waiver of debt automatically without an application. But I do think that this really should be two-track, and I encourage the department with that as the primary goal to also, especially when we're thinking about the long-term effect of these regulations, have as a secondary measure in the long run an ability for borrowers to affirmatively apply for hardship relief in circumstances that may not be captured by those automatic programs. And I don't think that should be the major focus, but I don't want it to get lost. And I hope that the department is able to come up with a proposal that has both.
Thank you, Jessica. A couple quick notes. Ashley is coming back to the table, as is Jalil. Thank you. Next, Kira.
Thank you. I also want to flag another form of hardship. So oftentimes the clients of legal aid organizations have different family compositions. And so you may have multiple adults contributing income to the family. Even if the borrower doesn't lose their job, if a family member that is contributing family income loses their job, that can pose significant financial hardship on the borrower and complicate their ability to pay for their student loans. In addition, I wanted to raise up that military spouses often struggle with paying their student loan debt. In a recent survey done by Blue Star Families, 34% of the active duty families reported that they had student loan debt, and of that 34%, 80% owed $10,000 or more. Military spouses have higher rates of unemployment and may have more frequent periods of unemployment over a period of time just because they're moving as their duty station changes. And so I would ask the department consider that population as well. Unlike active duty members, the military spouse may not be eligible for things like public service loan forgiveness. In addition, while some of the things I've suggested may be very difficult to automate, there are ways of simplifying the form that borrowers need to use to be eligible, to demonstrate that they're eligible for hardship. I think a great example of this was President Biden's previous broad-based cancellation form. It was easy to understand, it was fast to use, and so I would ask that the department model whatever it ultimately creates after a form like that. In addition, the form was easy to understand and employed plain language principles, and I think that is especially important here for any application that the department is creating.
Next. Sure.
I don't want to belabor any points that already have been made, especially concerning the buckets of borrowers or the groups who have undue hardship. But I'd like to go back to this issue of Parent Plus and graduate workers, and also couch it within the mental health or the quality of life and the moral hardship argument that Jaleel brought up. And I'm going to use myself as an example. And some people in my constituency, which are four-year borrowers. Many parents later in life have taken out loans to help their kids go back to school. One of the negotiators brought up the fact that his father won't pay off the loan, pay off a loan until he's 84 years old. Amongst that group is an aging population, and we have to, though the department considers permanent disability as a hardship, it doesn't count things like chronic illness. For myself, I went back to school, to graduate school, in my 50s. Shortly after doing so, I encountered a life-threatening illness that threw me into deferment. Though I still suffer with that illness, I have stage 4 non-alcoholic liver disease, and I also have chronic pancreatitis. I'm not on a transplant list for my liver yet, but I do have a MEL score. I am now approaching 66 years of age, still paying loans, and it doesn't seem to me that the department will reasonably be able to collect my loan in my lifetime, however long or short that may be, and that for other parents who have taken out loans for their children, who have had kids later in life and are taking out loans, they're not going to reasonably connect. So I would like for us to consider not only permanent disability, but chronic illness, because as people age, they do encounter chronic illnesses that not only preclude their ability to work fully, pay off their loans, but in order even to support their families. And going into your senior years with this burden hanging over you, someone brought up suicide. I've heard people said, it'd be better for me to be dead. I'm never going to get this around my neck. So we consider these things.
30 seconds, Chair.
Yeah, we consider chronic illness as one of those groups of borrowers who are experiencing hardship. Thank you.
You share. John, you're next.
Just two specific examples that I wanted to give. Well, one comment and one example. Ms. Gamage's example for herself, for example, she's over 65. She's almost certainly on Medicare. That would be and she's almost certainly not paying the Medicare premium penalty, just the regular amount. That would be an easy one. I also think it's important that people should not have to prostrate themselves before the department to get hardship. Making people beg is unseemly, and I think they should not have to give up. It should be easy and quick. And then let me just give one other example. I do a lot of healthcare work. People who receive Obamacare with a subsidy. The subsidy for Obamacare goes up to 400% of poverty, which, again, this is not an exclusive list, but anyone who's getting Obamacare with a subsidy, that's an indication of economic hardship. I think that's a quick and easy one. Should be available through data sharing. Does not require a lot of intrusive questions. Does not require people to, reveal lots of private information they may not want to reveal. I think we want lots of bigger and little examples that can be automated. Again, I'm just going to say it again, that the department can find the data on without people actually having to come forward with it. And I think part of it is creatively thinking about relevant databases that we can use as shorthand for hardship.
Thank you, John. Next, you're up, Jalil.
Thank you. I think that it's important for us to also be clear that hardship shouldn't only be defined in really particular ways. That if we're thinking about what are ways to deliver relief, and that's automatic, that's including catching as many borrowers as possible who are experiencing hardship, I think that we also need to bring it back down to the basics and to the data that we know the department has. So again, if we have borrowers who've been in repayment for 10 years and they have, spent large portion of those years in default with zero or no principal bearing payments, then those are other indicators for us to say that we are dealing with a borrower who's in default, who's in hardship. And those are simple, ready to go data points that could allow the department to have a broad approach to hardship. And again, not burden student loan borrowers with having to prove or just share the pain, rehearse that pain of not only the hardships of living with student debt, but also the hardships of dealing with the Department of Ed and loan servicers who just simply over decades now haven't always delivered accurate information, have changed programs so many times, have presented confusing information, have made people go through multi-year processes only to be denied because of tiny mistakes in paperwork, or sometimes denials without any indication why they were denied. I think that some of this hardship is also inflicted by just past servicing and past processes, and it's important to keep it simple, keep it broad, and keep it automated. And again, if someone's been paying on debt or have been in repayment for, again, I would say 10 years or more, I think that's a hardship indicator that should make them eligible for relief.
Thank you, sir. Ashley, you are next.
Through organized efforts, there have been over 30,000 student debtors that have submitted a demand letter to the Department of Education to use the Compromise, Settle, Waive, and Release Authority under the Higher Education Act. I am wondering if the department is considering these under this regulation or under this NEGREG, and what exactly they are doing. For these letters, I know that hearing some of the stories in, undue hardship with Biden's 1020 plan, there were a lot of people who made financial decisions based off the fact that they received a letter approving them for that forgiveness. I know we can't go back and change the Supreme Court's decision, but there is a considerable amount of people who switched jobs, who left abusive relationships, who had medical procedures they had put off because they had the idea that they would have these loans forgiven. So I think that there are a group of people who have now kind of backed themselves into a corner, assuming that they would not have these loans hanging over them.
Thank you, Ashley. As a quick point, Sarah Butts will be coming to the table in place of Cher Gamage. Ms. Taylor.
I'd also like to note that many of the things that we've talked about so far, medical debt, chronic illness, housing cost, differences in regional expenses, staying in repayment for longer than 10 years, all of these things could be indicators of a borrower's inability to repay the debt in full, or the fact that the department is going to be unable to collect the debt in full within a reasonable time frame, even by use of its collection powers. And so all of these things may indicate that the department may struggle to collect this debt in the first place as well.
Other hands, anything else to add to this discussion? Sarah, go ahead.
This has been a really interesting discussion, and we appreciate you all asking us about what the hardships that we're hearing about and that we've experienced are. So thank you. I think it would be great if the department could really do an analysis of the data available to see, you know, what are the trends? Are we looking at borrowers over the lifespan? What does that tell us? What different types of occupations are associated with hardship in terms of how long it takes to pay back some of these loans, and use that information so that we're really being data driven in our way of trying to address some of the challenges that we're facing.
Thank you, Sarah. Lane, you're next.
This is a little bit out there, but something I think about a lot is the difference between income and wealth. And there are income-driven repayment plans, but there are not wealth-driven repayment plans. So I think, you know, another thing to think about is family net worth. You know, we look at that at the front end when we're looking for that expected family contribution. And so I think that might be another thing to kind of keep in mind, is that sometimes just the salary on paper isn't a good indication of what's being paid for with that salary, what other assets and debts are there. So just kind of throwing out that income and wealth are not the same thing, and that just because somebody has a pretty solid income doesn't mean that they're in the same position as anyone else with that same income.
Thank you, Lang. Jessica.
Thanks. I think you can hear from the table that this is something that we feel very strongly about, and I think people have given lots of good examples, but I guess maybe I would ask the department whether there's anything more specific that you would like to maybe ask the table with respect to the use of the waiver authority here. Is there anything else more concrete that we can provide you today during this session about this question?
John, are you okay with me chiming in?
Please do, Tammy.
Thanks. Jessica, thank you for asking and for prompting us. This really is an informational session. We did not come to the table with proposed regulatory text, which is sometimes typical of a first negotiation. We come to the table with some ideas of things that we're going to do. We did not do that. What we tried to do was really engage in conversation with you guys and solicit your opinion and your insight from the constituents that you represent for us to have a good faith negotiation and take what you are giving us now, circling back before the second session, providing proposed regulatory language for us to consider and continue our conversations. We're not purposely being vague or evasive. Many of the things that you're asking us are things we cannot respond to immediately. We need to go back. We need to look at the data. We need to be able to analyze what you're asking and discuss it as a group. So we plan to do that. We plan to come back with more information for the second session. But these 2 days are about us listening to you. You represent a number of individuals in all of the different categories, and I'm listening. This conversation specifically about hardship, it's hard to hear what our borrowers are facing. And we are not insensitive to hearing about all of the obstacles and where we can find ways to streamline and automate and provide the secretary the authority to make great decisions for these borrowers in these respective categories. We want to do that. And we are looking to you to help us do that throughout the rest of this negotiated rulemaking 2 extra months. So no, we don't have a whole lot to say right now, but to encourage us to continue the conversation, because through this conversation, we learn and we're able to adapt and create something that we can present to the table during the second round of negotiations.
Tammy, any other additional discussion on this issue question? Jalil, please.
Can I just get clarification on, because I understand that there's a listening, primarily the goal is to listen to us as negotiators, but I think as we're all preparing for the future sessions and trying to make sense of this session now, it would also help us just to get a little bit more framing, if that's, framing around what are questions or still ideas out there that you would like to hear from us on. If it's framing around, what are areas where we may need to spend some more time discussing today. But I think just to make sure that we're making best use of this, the department doesn't need to share a proposal, but it would be helpful if the department could share where could be some more value add, where could be some more clarification, where could there be some more discussion. So I do want to just push back a little bit that if this is just a listening session, then we're not, getting a chance to hear from the department on what you need so that you can prepare for the next session. So I just want to nudge there more for us to get a little bit more detailed clarification, framing something. If this indeed is supposed to be, a conversation between the negotiators and the department.
Jalil?
What we'd like to do is we'd like to take a break, and we'd like to circle back to answer that question after we've had a break.
Okay. And I was endeavoring to give us a break probably in the next 10 minutes or so. I see there's still some hands up. Why don't we go ahead and proceed with those? And,
John,
yeah.
let me interject. Let's take a listing of the people who have their hands up and go ahead and honor the department's request for a break.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
You.
Ashley and Sarah, I've got you.
Minutes, please.
30 minutes. All right. So let's call it 2:30. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming back in a timely fashion. Couple quick things I wanted to cover. Just a reiteration that these first 2 days are for the purpose of the department intaking information from the negotiators so that they can be responsive. And that's what we're here to do today. I also wanted to reiterate the idea that the comments that we're making are new, that we're trying to explore different and new space from what we've already covered. So if we could keep that in mind. Quick note before I move to Ashley and Sarah, Jada Sanford is coming back to the table in place of Jordan Nellums for currently enrolled post-secondary education students. Thank you. All right, Ashley, take it away.
I'm not sure if the department could answer this right now, but do we have a time frame for when these releases or waivers are going to be rolling out? We are going into a very contentious election year, which may not actually work in a lot of our favor, which kind of seems almost pointless if this is going to be pushed, if this cancellation is going to be pushed into 2025. I know that there are a lot of people who are very upset that they didn't get the Biden forgiveness, and it's turned them off to voting, which I'm terrified of. And so I'm kind of wondering where the department stands as far as timeline goes and how quickly they are willing to act on rolling some of these initiatives out.
I see you've raised your hand, so go ahead.
Did you say me, John?
Yes, I did.
Oh, sorry.
No worries.
So typically we're held to a master calendar schedule, which means if we publish the notice of proposed rulemaking by November 1st, which will not be this year, so it'd be November 1st, 2024, then we would have those rules implemented by July 1, 2025, unless the secretary exercised his authority for early implementation. And when we would craft the notice of final rule, we would include an implementation schedule at that time.
Thank you, Tammy. All right, Sarah, you're next.
Thank you. This is a comment and follow-up from our last discussion regarding hardship. The department might look at individual borrowers who have a history of having certified their employment for public service and now find themselves employed in a job where they no longer qualify. This is a story that we've heard repeatedly over the last couple of years and that I wanted to lift up for consideration. That maybe there would be a way to provide some student loan relief for that cohort of folks.
Sarah, appreciate that. Ms. Taylor, you're next.
This is a follow-up question for Tammy. So the SAVE IDR rule was not subject to the master calendar. Why is this relief regulation, whatever shape it takes, subject to the master calendar?
It was subject to the master calendar because we published before November 1st, and then we early implemented provisions. So the full IDR, the way we're going to implement this, everything that we are working in that wasn't early implemented. So there was a staged implementation, so to speak. We did early implementation on 5 components. Then we're going to do another early implementation when the department is ready to implement that provision. And then the rest of the rule must be implemented by July 1, 2024. So we did adhere to the master calendar. It's just we exercised the authority on a number of provisions to early implement. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Tammy. Wisdom?
I just wanted to bring up another point in relationship to the last question around hardship, particularly around middle-class borrowers, since we do not have a seat for middle-class borrowers here in negotiations. Definitely want to bring up a point that middle-class borrowers may face hardships, even though they might have higher wages, and face long-term harm because of their loans. We have reports that say that since 2005, homeownership among recent college graduates have declined by 1.8% for every $1,000 of student loan debt. 51% of renters say that student loans keep them from buying homes. 29% of student loan debt holders say that debt has kept them from homeownership. And we know that homeownership in America is one of the best ways to enter into this economic system. And so I think it's a point that we need to make sure we also hone in on in terms of how we are alleviating that burden for folks in the middle class.
Thank you, Wisdom. I see that shares coming back to the table for student loan borrowers who attended four-year programs. I see that we have run the allotted time that we had considered for this question. I hand it off to the department. I know that we were thinking about either circling back to consider questions from yesterday in light of the comments that Mr. Miller made earlier today, or any other possible avenue. So I ask you, Tammy?
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
We would like to take a couple more minutes to go back to questions that we addressed yesterday to see if there was anything. Because we had some additional framing today, we wanted to make sure that we had all of your concerns and your observations addressed or listened to them. We know that this type of session can be kind of frustrating, where we're sitting at the table and we're exchanging ideas and you're giving us input. It's necessary for us to get this right. So as frustrating as it is, this has been so super helpful for us. We are in a much better position going into our next steps, and I'll explain what those are a little bit later. And if we're lucky enough to be able to really narrow down some of the regulatory text and be able to exercise early implementation, we're willing to do that as well. But I'd like for us to take a few minutes to go back to those questions, and if there are any comments or concerns that you guys have in light of what we've heard from Ben earlier today, let's go ahead and talk those through, and then I can kind of prepare us for what's to come between now and the next session.
Just a reminder that any questions you may have will be viewed in the chat section. So thank you very much. Lane, I see your hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to make a quick clarification about a point I made yesterday. So I was talking about hanging loans and how those are often left after public service loan forgiveness or the IDR account adjustment. And I just want to clarify that I'm not suggesting changing PSLF in that case. What I'm suggesting is going to accounts that had already gotten PSLF and forgiving any remaining balance. So just to kind of make that clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Lane. Appreciate that. Scott Buchanan.
If I can get myself off mute. So since it sounds like we're talking sort of holistically about things that were talked about yesterday and today, I think, you know, the department has heard a lot of the concerns about sort of borrower issues, sort of disparate impact on minorities and others, and, you know, perhaps, you know, topics like Parent Plus loans and overlending in that space. I think those are issues that hopefully, as you're looking through the rulemaking process, you'll find ways to address and find targeted solutions for those things. But I think it's also important as we look at getting proposals from the department that the department be really transparent as it drafts those things about the strength of the legal justification here. We can't go down the path again about making promises to borrowers that can't be kept, like in past debt relief proposals. We've heard from our end that anger and frustration very loudly. Courts have weighed in on waiver authority, and we have elected officials like Senator Grassley-Portman sending the secretary letters on questioning this legal authority. And Ed must really ensure that any regulation can withstand that legal scrutiny. If regs get produced that don't survive, then we're going to further erode the trust of borrowers in the system. And we're really focused, you know, since it's our world of operational issues, on how to make these regs replicable, sustainable, and consistent so they can be easily explained to borrowers. Like we've had these one-time fixes and they can help, but they're not a real solution for future borrowers. And today's one-time relief programs have taken months and some may take years to deliver on and are completely confusing, frankly. So if we pass regulations and cannot get it to borrowers in a timely fashion because there are planning or resource constraints, we also need to be able to explain it. Then we will continue to have the underlying problem of borrowers feeling like the system is failing. So I hope the department will take that into consideration as it drafts some proposals for this committee to review and provide detailed feedback on in the future.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. I also want to echo what Lane just said and note in the context of the discussion that we had today, that where I raised yesterday, borrowers who had been steered into, or rather borrowers who would have been eligible for forgiveness under the limited PSLF waiver and would have been eligible for forgiveness in light of the IDR adjustment, but were not able to take advantage of that because they got misinformation about consolidation, misinformation that we're all very well aware of that is pervasive and well documented, that those are categories of individuals who've already been determined to be eligible ultimately because of characteristics of their loans and of their circumstances for forgiveness and who need it. And that this is an opportunity to identify a discrete cohort of individuals that can be assisted fairly easily. And again, that though I've used the terms PSLF and IDR here, that we're not talking about making changes to the programs themselves, but rather identifying easily ascertainable cohorts that have demonstrated an entitlement to relief and a need for it, and whose circumstances have stopped them from accessing that relief through no fault of their own. Thank you.
Thank you. Wisdom.
Just a quick process question. I know there have been multiple documents, research reports, links dropped in the chat here. If we are submitting that, I know that there was an ask to submit these via Word doc, is that correct? And I would just send that to you, Cindy.
Please send that to anyone on the FMCS team or all of us, and we'll forward to the appropriate people. And we were asking that it be sent in Word form, yes.
Perfect. So if it's a link that we have from an active site, having that in like Word format would be the best practice, correct?
Let me just say this. If it is the intent, if you're submitting something with the intent that it be posted on the department's website, it does need to be in Word format, including source documents, because these documents have to be in compliance with many regulations prior to the ability to post them. And that is an easier lift for those who have to review them for compliance if they are in Word, including source documents. Excuse me. Then prior to being posted, they would be converted into a PDF for posting. So if these links in the chat are just for anyone who wants to take a look at them for informational purposes and don't have the intent to have them posted, then that is fine. But you are 100% correct, Wisdom. Anything that you submit for posting needs to come through the FMCS team in Word format.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions as it relates to question 1 and 2 that we covered yesterday in light of Mr. Miller's comments earlier today? Jessica.
Would it be possible to do a very quick caucus?
Sure. Who are you looking to caucus with?
I think the department servicers, civil rights, state AGs, states, and share in particular. I want to talk about FELS, so I think any of the borrower seats that particularly have to do with FELS. And then I think that the people I named are the seats that have a view on FELS.
Jessica, how long are you looking for?
10 minutes.
Okay.
Is that all right?
John?
Yeah, go ahead, Cindy.
Let me help out
Please.
here because this hasn't come up, okay? Jessica, did you say you'd like to have the department in there?
Yes.
Okay. Is the department willing to participate in that caucus?
I also realized I might have left out legal aids. If I didn't say that, I meant to.
We are, however, there is a concern of having 10 minutes for that caucus and us having the ability to wrap up our thoughts for the day before public comment. So while we are certainly, we certainly want to definitely caucus with you, we do have some wrap up comments, basically kind of a roadmap of what we're going to be able to provide to you and what we're hoping that you'll give to us by the next meeting.
But we just get any, if there are any
Oh,
minutes
I'm sorry,
before you need to
excuse
start,
me.
don't we have 45 minutes left?
You do. I don't
Okay.
know how to tell time. It's
No.
apparently, it's been a long day. I'm
No
thinking 3
worries.
o'clock in my brain.
Okay, no worries. So Jessica, and for the rest of you, this is how it needs to work as far as setting up these caucus rooms. Mike, can you give me a hand and pull up a breakout room? Jessica, I'm going to ask you to identify the persons by name that you would like to go into that caucus room. And then once that is completed, we will go off live stream and the discussion at the table will stop until the caucus is over. Okay? So Jessica, help us out here and give us the names of the negotiators in department that you want to participate.
Sure. I'll do the best I can. Scott Buchanan and Ben Lee from servicers, BIL from state AGs, Kira from legal assistance, Cher from the borrowers, Wisdom from civil rights, Lane from states, and the department staff as you wish. If there's anyone else I've missed, please speak up.
Okay, Tammy, can you tell us who you intend to have in that caucus? Where'd Tammy go?
This is Soren. I'm not sure where she went, but
Yeah,
for the
she might have
department,
got-
could
Yeah, she might
could
have
you
got
make
posted up.
could you make sure you have Tam, of course, her, me, Ben Miller should be on here, and Toby Merrill.
Okay.
Sarah Butts has asked, are the alternates joining as well?
Only the people whose names have been listed.
Can you add me, Jessica?
Sure, John. I'm not meaning to be exclusive, but
No,
this is
I know.
a memory test here.
I was
so-
not taking it that way. I just wanted to, since we have to, yeah, just add me too, please. Thank you.
Yeah, again, the discussion is felt. I don't necessarily think institutions make a ton of sense, but if
Okay. So Mike, did you capture those names?
I think so.
I wrote them down.
Yeah.
So now that we have that on the record of who will be caucusing, Patrick, we can stop the live stream, please.
Welcome back. We're back from our brief caucus. What we were doing previously was we were circling back on questions from yesterday in light of the comments that Mr. Miller made this morning. I do see that it is currently 3:03 Eastern time, so we're 27 minutes away from the beginning of our public comment. I do want to be as productive as possible, so is that where we want to get back to? Okay. All right. Does anyone have, again, keeping in mind what we're trying to do is we're trying to circle back on questions 1 and 2 from yesterday in light of the comments that were made earlier today, clarifications from Mr. Miller, and adding new texture to the conversation. All right, Ms. Sanford, go ahead.
To add something new, I think, to the conversation, it's probably known, but as someone who's like currently enrolled and has student loans, like many of my peers, I haven't even begun to have to pay these loans back, and to try and navigate these like obviously flawed avenues to repayment, and just being in school and knowing the anxieties and the impact it has now, and to see that still as I go on to like 60, 70 years old, that's still what I have to look forward to. And that's just now having to being in high school to college, that's a complete turn off. It's discouraging people who want to pursue a degree in higher education, which of course like isn't the goal. That's all I want to say about that.
I do want to make a note that Jalil is back at the table for the student loan borrowers who attended graduate programs. Melissa, you're next.
Thanks, John. I wanted to make a comment about the question yesterday about how we help our borrowers who are in repayment know about some of these some of these repayment options that they have access to. And the one item I think that public schools that I'm representing, the 2 and the 4 years, have struggled with as we have gone into the return to repayment cycle for borrowers who had not been in repayment for the last 3 years due to the COVID pandemic, is that once our students graduate or leave school and go on to repayment, they sort of become they become owned by the servicers and the Department of Ed. And while we do have some connection with them through our alumni association with our former students is a little bit different than our active relationship with them while they are enrolled. So I would like to see a way for the Department of Education to create more of a bridge with schools on how we can understand the communications going to our students post leaving our institutions, and how we can then support the messaging to those students, because we want them to know about these provisions. They trust us, the schools, because they've had a relationship with us, and we think we can do more to support the messaging that is being sent to students when they go into the repayment stage of their lives to help them better navigate that path. So I wanted to throw that out there as a comment and a suggestion to help create that bridge between us so that we can better help support the communications and our students through a lifetime of being a good repayer. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Just a point real quick. Benjamin Lee is coming in to the table in replacement of Scott Buchanan. All right. Any additional comments on questions 1 and 2? Jalil, you're next.
Thank you. I think a group that we have talked about a little, but I want to make sure to uplift in our framing of borrowers who may fit under questions 1 and 2 are borrowers who have debt but no credential. And I think it's important to expand that group not only for undergraduate borrowers, but also thinking about graduate borrowers who are often left out of that conversation of graduate borrowers who have debt but did not earn a graduate credential. And I think in the department on final rulemaking, they shared a table, it was table 2.1, that showed the uptake of their enrollment in IDR plans, and it said that 22% of borrowers who did not complete a credential are using IDR plans, which is at a much lower rate than borrowers who do have a credential. And I think that's something for us to think about and uplift, is the particular hardship experiences of borrowers who have some debt, but no credential. And just thinking about, even after many different strategies of reaching out to this group, that it still has been a group that the Department of Ed and Servicers have struggled with servicing and reaching. But we know from data are experiencing often some of the worst outcomes around student loan debt and struggling to repay.
Thank you, sir. All right. Next, I have Lane.
I have just been thinking about data sources, and I think that the complaints that FSA Ombuds Office receives and that the CFPB receives about student loans is a great place to kind of pick up on patterns around what kind of folks need relief. I have several of my complainants right now who don't agree with the assessment their servicer made or that Ed made on a relief program application. They've been told to file a complaint with FSA. So I just kind of think that it's important to remember that we do already have a lot of data around all of this kind of stuff, even almost real-time data. Since I collect complaints as part of my job, it's just something I think of, is that there's a lot of really valuable quantitative and qualitative data to be found in that CFPB and FSA Ombuds portal.
Thank you, Lane. Angelica, you're next.
Thank you. I just want to, as this may lead to other topics and understanding the alignment with this topic, is that we're talking about the current population that is experiencing loan indebtedness. But also there's two other areas that should be in conversation as well, and it's also looking at the federal aid programs to prevent loan indebtedness. As I mentioned earlier and yesterday, is that the Pell Grant program has taken a significant decline of covering educational costs since its initial implementation, meaning that it's just going to, this conversation of loan indebtedness is just going to continue until we review the federal Pell Grant program to see how it's preventing loan indebtedness. The other area I feel like we should be discussing as well is the borrowers who actually paid off their loans, who've already paid off their loans. So the loans, the loan payments that they made should be reviewed, as well as we're talking about relieving others from loan debt.
Thank you, Angelica. Anyone else want to comment on our questions from yesterday in light of the clarification earlier this morning from Mr. Miller? Jalil.
Thank you. I also want to uplift the comment around Pell Grant. So though the Biden cancellation plan was struck down by the Supreme Court, there was a moment where the department really, for I would argue the first time, used Pell Grant as a way to highlight both the experiences of students who had to take on who received a Pell Grant and had to take on student debt, but also their parents. And that seems like that coupling of providing relief both to students and their parents through the Pell Grant as an indicator, as a way to do fast and broad cancellation, is a mechanism that I would just encourage the department to think about how to address some of these questions or create some of these buckets as we're moving through future rulemaking, because I think that was an opportunity that I'm assuming was both vetted by the White House and the department, where Pell Grant became a great indicator of how, in that case, to provide up to $20,000 of relief for borrowers and do it in a way that kind of took into account both the borrower and their parents. So just wanted to lift up Pell Grant as another strong indicator that, again, has already been vetted by the department and the White House.
Thank you. Ashley, what would you like to add to the conversation?
I asked this yesterday, both in the chat and as a question. And I'm just wondering if we could get possibly a list from the department of social media avenues that they're using to try to reach some of their borrowers, to get in touch with them about their options that are currently the public service loan forgiveness, borrower defense, and the SAVE plan. I believe someone put in the chat just the generic Instagram account, but I was wondering if the department had any other accounts that are specific to student borrowing or higher education, and if we could get a list of those and then possibly come up with some ad ideas or some resources that might help with outreach.
Thank you. Actually, if you have not already put that into the chat, I encourage you to do so now. Thank you. Anything else to add on the questions from yesterday? Any additional new comments to make? Anything at all? All right. It is 3:14. How do we want to utilize these 16 minutes to their best use?
John,
Tammy?
if it's okay, I'd like to try to do some wrap up and some framing for our next negotiated rulemaking session and kind of chat a little bit about all that has transpired between the last couple of days. We will give a proposed regulatory text to the negotiators a week before the next rulemaking session. That will represent our position at the time that we give that to you, taking, of course, into consideration all of our discussions from yesterday and today. It will reflect that position. What we are hoping that we get from you guys is kind of like a little takeaway, maybe a homework assignment. You know, we should all understand homework, being that we're in some sort of the education world. We would like for you to really look at the text, what's working with it, what's not working with it, what your preferences are, the rationale for which you think things need to be changed. Our goal here is for us to reach consensus, and we want to work alongside you and with you for that goal. We also know that there have been numerous data requests and numerous requests for information. The data that's available to us and the resources that are available to us and those that we can share and the questions that we can answer, we will do so to the best of our abilities. It may take us a little bit of time, and those things that we can provide to you will filter through FMCS, and they'll circle that back to you guys. But what we really have learned so much from you during these past 2 days is framing for our thought processes and exploring the different ways that we intend to help borrowers in the circumstances that we've already given you, such as interest, looking at that avenue, looking at the length of time borrowers have been in repayment, looking at gainful employment provisions, looking at hardship, and of course, looking at other ways when borrowers are eligible for things, but they haven't quite applied for them. Automation, we heard you loud and clear about automation, and we too want to implement as many things as we possibly can that would allow us to do so and automatically provide benefits to those borrowers. So going forward, in case you have any questions, you know, I would hope that we can, you know, ask them now about what our expectations are for you as negotiators. Is we're going to provide you with reg text. We're going to provide you with a path of where we think we are based on these conversations and the position of the department. And we hope that you guys will look through that and provide us with feedback for the next session.
Thank you, Tammy. Appreciate that. I'm seeing our waiting room fill up with what I presume are public commenters. Do we want to move towards public comment now?
We're about 15 minutes or about 23 minutes ahead, or 13 minutes ahead of schedule.
Right.
The first speaker, though, that had his time slot is with us.
Anything to add before we move in that direction?
It would be nice if we could just have a 5-minute break.
Sure. Sounds great.
Thank you.
All right. Why don't we go ahead and call it a 7-minute break to 3:25. See you all then. Everyone, we are back and we are ready to begin with public comment. Cindy, who is the first public commenter?
Your first public commenter is Jim Blue of DF Policy. Jim, can you hear us?
I can, Cindy. How are you?
Okay, wonderful. I'd like to welcome you to the comment period, and we appreciate you taking the time to join the committee today and address them directly. You will have 3 minutes to make your comments to the committee. We will give you a 30-second notice of when your time is about to expire, and then we will let you know when your time has expired. So with that, you are ready to go.
Terrific, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Jim Blue. I am the co-founder of the Defense of Freedom Institute. We're known by our acronym DFI, or simply DEFY. As a few of you know, I served under Betsy DeVos as the Assistant Secretary for Planning, Evaluation, and Policy Development, including policy for federal student aid. These sessions seem to be leading inevitably to a rule that will expand the Secretary's power dramatically and perhaps dangerously. The 1 out of 7 Americans who hold student debt seem to be quite well represented by this committee. I don't pretend to speak for the other 6 out of 7 Americans. At this point, we really do not know how voters will react to the administration adding hundreds of billions of dollars to the federal debt through loan forgiveness during a time of inflation when Congress is struggling to finance our responsibilities at home and overseas. What we do know is that the Biden administration's approach to student debt has successfully transformed federal student loans into a highly partisan issue. Perhaps that was inevitable when the government collects loan payments from its own citizens. I hope that Ed will share with the committee some of the letters and comments coming in from Congress. For now, let me specifically point to one addressed to Secretary Cardona from several U.S. senators led by Finance Chair Chuck Grassley. One passage captures the tone of the letter. We, senators, are gravely concerned that the department is undertaking a blatant political process with a predetermined outcome. It is unfair to string student loan borrowers along for political purposes. As the Undersecretary repeatedly noted in his opening comments, the student loan system is broken. To be clear, opponents to this process are concerned as well that some borrowers have been harmed by the federal student loan program. But we should be having a conversation about the source of this harm. That is, bad federal policy and bad management by the U.S. Department and its vendors. Both of these root causes can and should be addressed. This committee, unfortunately, cannot effectively address either one. Congress is not without power in this situation, including its power over the student aid admin budget. In fact, the Grassley letter specifically asked the administration to engage in a serious and legal process to fix the law. As the letter concludes, our phones are ready and our doors are open. I hope the administration will embrace that offer. In the meantime, I encourage the committee and the department
30 seconds.
To avoid grand gestures like those that led to a rebuke from the Supreme Court. That would only make it harder than ever to genuinely fix our student loan programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blue. We appreciate your comments. Okay, John, next you have Christy Smith from Global Education Consultants.
Christy, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you for taking this opportunity to speak directly to the negotiators. You have 3 minutes and you'll have a 30-second warning. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Christy Smith. I am currently an organizational learning analyst at the U.S. Department of State. I'm doing the exact same public service work as my colleagues, but because my status is as a contractor with a different EIN, my work is not being counted as public service. I asked the committee to consider the unfairness of this and to change this policy. But I'm here today to speak about hanging loans. I am one of at least 79 known public service workers who have PSLF hanging loans. I have certified public service consecutively from 2007 to 2019, 12 years, working as a public school teacher and for qualifying nonprofits. When the limited PSLF waiver was announced last year, since my current work didn't qualify, it was the one shot I had to get right. Despite dozens of hours diligently researching how to consolidate my older FFEL loans with my direct loans to maximize forgiveness, I found only conflicting information. It was clear I needed to consolidate my FFEL loans, but information was not provided on how to deal with consolidation for older FFEL loans with direct loans. I called my servicer at the time, Navient, on the day I consolidated, and I was misled, being told that there was no benefit not needed to consolidate my direct loans. I now have the phone recording of this, thanks to working with an FSA ombudsman. Because I was misled, only 3% of my loans were discharged. I would have a zero balance today if I had only checked the boxes to consolidate my direct loans with the FFEL loans that day. Let that sink in. 3 check boxes cost me nearly $50,000. You can imagine how much sleep I've lost, the huge financial loss for me this has created, and the emotional toll because my case has not been fixed. Under the limited PSLF waiver, it is clear that PSLF has not been equitably processed by leaving us with hanging loans, even though we all have at least 120 months of public service employment and student loan payments certified under the waiver. Furthermore, many of us, like myself, have submitted PSLF reconsideration requests, which have been denied, and yet a majority of these denials do not address the details and nuances of our cases. FSA is under a legal decree to look carefully and fix PSLF cases like ours under the reconsideration process. The fact FSA is not looking closely at the facts of our cases and fixing them means that FSA is in blatant violation under the law. The Department of Education has been aware of our hanging loans since at least June of 2022, but has ignored our plight. Now that federal student loan payments are due this month on loans that should have been forgiven under the waiver, we are asking one more time, please do the right thing and fix them. We are organizing and ready to escalate our cases if they are not fixed. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Christy. Cindy, who do we have next?
Next, we have Kristen Folsom, who is representing herself.
Kristen? Kristen, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Thank you for taking time to do this today. You have 3 minutes to make your statement. You'll be given a 30-second warning. Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Kristen Folsom. I'm a student loan borrower, and initially as an undergraduate borrower, which took me 20 years to pay that loan back, and now as a graduate borrower and also as a Parent Plus for my daughter who graduated from college in 2020. I'm currently employed with the Department of Health and Human Services, but I was a government contractor for 16 years. And I'm here to bring attention to this cohort of borrowers who should also be entitled to public service loan forgiveness. Government contractors, whether at the federal, state, or local level. Yes, I understand that the Department of Education cannot change the regulations set forth in CFR 685.219. But the department should at least assess its interpretation of the regulation, especially the definition of non-government public service, which means services provided by employees of a non-governmental qualified employer, where the employer has devoted a majority of its full-time employees to working in at least one of the following areas: emergency management, civilian service to military personnel, military service, public safety, law enforcement, public interest law services, early childhood education, public service for individuals with disabilities or the elderly, public health, public education, or public school and library or other school-based services. To further strengthen the argument that the government contractor should be entitled to loan forgiveness, I point to a standard used by the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, wherein the EEOC considers that government contractors who want to bring a discrimination case against the government can be treated as actual government employees if the agency in question exercises sufficient control over the employee's work activity. There are many standards the EEOC uses engaging the exercise of sufficient control of the contractor's activity, but one of the most prominent is that the government agency in question has the right to control when, where, and how the worker performs the job, and whether there is a continuing relationship between the worker and the employer. As government contractors, unfortunately, we are treated as actual employees of the government, but do not receive the same perquisites as employees receive, namely in this case, the right to student loan forgiveness after 10 years of service and payment. In summary, I'm asking the Department of Education to consider government contractors in their assessment of public service loan forgiveness, and to reevaluate its interpretation of the definitions related to non-government
30 seconds, Kristen.
Qualifying employer or purpose, which says the public service loan forgiveness program is intended to encourage individuals to enter and continue full-time public service. With my last few seconds, I'd like to say that totally in all, my loans total $212,000, and even on an ITR, I owe $1,378, which is due right now. With the money that I saved during the pause, what did I do? I helped my daughter, who went to work and volunteered for 2 years for AmeriCorps, and I helped her get on her feet and get an apartment. What I did was give to my country a brand new, productive, caring, and thinking citizen. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Cindy, who do we have next?
Okay, Galaxy A20 is in the room. I'm going to go ahead and let them in again and try to get an identification from them to make sure they're a registered speaker. I would like to remind those who did sign up and register to be a speaker, now is the time you need to be logging in so that you don't miss your time slot. There are several that have not logged in yet. So I want to give you that reminder that please log in with the link that was provided to you to exercise your speaking slot. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and let Galaxy A20 in, and you can try to confirm again, John. Chris is always having difficulty with this internet connecting to audio, I believe. I can barely see. Galaxy A20.
Can you hear us? Hello? Galaxy A20.
No. I think, let's go ahead and remove him. I believe it's a he. I can't see the picture very well. Let's go ahead and remove Galaxy A20. Hopefully they'll log back into the session and it'll work better. We only have one remaining person in the waiting room. So again, if the public commenters that registered and were contacted by the department, please log into the session. So we're gonna go to Lee Latham, and she's representing herself.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Hello?
Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, Lee or Elizabeth Latham?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Thank you for being here and commenting to the negotiators. You have 3 minutes to make your comments and you will be given a 30-second warning. Your time is starting now.
All right, thank you. My name is Elizabeth Latham. I'm a type 1 diabetic and I live in the Mississippi Delta. Growing up, I was raised by a single mother and we lived well below the poverty line. I got the chance to go to college. I was the first person in my family to go to college, and because of that and because of our financial situation, I had to take out student loans. My husband is also a diabetic, and believe it or not, our cat is a diabetic. So we are all dealing with a lot of health issues and a lot of medication costs. We both had to take out student loans, and we both went on to become teachers in the public school system. And knowing what you know about the public school system, we don't get paid a lot. Our student loans have not been forgiven through any kind of public service loan forgiveness. And we are both sitting at around $100,000 each. So we are really struggling to make these payments, and we are, we're just kind of tired and we don't know what to do. We have been in touch with our loan servicers, with government officials, local and federal, state and federal, and we are running out of options. Once payments start, we may not be able to afford the medication that keeps us alive. So that's my story, and I hope that it helps you make some decisions that will help us. And yeah, that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Cindy, who do we have next?
Next, we have Jeffrey Briggs representing himself.
Thank you. Jeffrey, can you hear us? Jeffrey, can you hear us? Jeffrey Briggs, can you hear me? Looks like he's connecting to audio. Jeffrey Briggs, can you hear me? You are muted if you're trying to talk. Jeffrey, can you hear me? Jeffrey, can you hear me?
He's muted again, John.
Yeah, yep. Jeffrey Briggs, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Jeffrey Briggs? We cannot hear you.
How about now?
I can hear you now. Can you activate your video? Thank you. You capable of activating your video?
Yes.
Okay. Welcome to public comment here today. Appreciate you taking the time to speak directly to our negotiators. You will have 3 minutes to make your comment. You will be given a 30-second warning.
Sounds good.
All right. Go ahead. Your time runs now.
Okay. I just want to thank you all for doing what you're doing, for making life a little bit easier for us with student loans here. I'm a 65-plus-year-old male that's been now collecting Social Security for a couple years now. I also work a full-time job, and I have to work the full-time job because my wife's 10 years younger than myself. And so our loan payments with her working and stuff are way too high, so we need the extra income. And I'm currently on extended pay program, but that actually was my cheaper route to go next to the pay program, but it's still, still a tough nut to crack every month here. My loans have also doubled from the interest over the years. I've been doing loans since 2007, so you can tell I've been doing this a long time here. I have both subsidized and unsubsidized loans. My main thing for calling and talking to you today is I believe that a student loan should stop once the student starts collecting either Social Security, or that can even be an age limit, like 65, 66 years old. And I think that getting the relief of this loan would be giving seniors like myself almost like a raise on our Social Security as well. I'd like to be able to retire, spend time with my grandkids, or I do volunteering, at shelters and things like that. But I'm real limited because I'm stuck working that full-time job. And I've reached out to the new the loan servicer here about the new SAFE program. It seemed like they were kind of a little bit in flux here with the 5 and 10% threshold here that doesn't kick in until next 2024. I pretty much had to pull that information out to try to figure out where I sat with my loan payments. And so that's kind of the whole thing that I wanted to talk to you guys about, and just if you can somehow make that easier, if you can help us seniors with the Social Security, I think that would help us a lot as well. But I wanted to say I truly appreciate everything that you guys are doing.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Appreciate that. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too.
Okay,
Cindy,
John.
who do you have next?
Next, we have Alice Smith representing herself.
Fantastic. Thank you. Alice, can you hear me?
Hey, yeah.
Welcome today. This is your opportunity to speak directly to the negotiators here. You will have 3 minutes and you will be given a 30-second warning. Go ahead.
Sure. So I'm a mom of 4 in Ohio. I have 2 kids who are college graduates. One almost paid off her loans. One is enrolled in SAVE, and that's awesome. I have 2 other kids. One is a sophomore and one is a freshman. I was looking at the 5-point priorities that this committee was contemplating, and I really didn't see anything that's being done for current or future students to prevent them from getting into impossible debt at a young age, or to help make college affordable. As you know, federal subsidized student loans are what, $5,500 to $7,500 a year. You can maybe go to community college for that, you know, for I guess the first 2 years, but college costs $25,000 a year. That's an in-state public school, because it's not just tuition, you're mostly required to live on campus. That requirement is 15 grand. You know, how is a family supposed to do it? How is a family like me, of 4 kids, supposed to send 4 kids to college? How are these kids supposed to send themselves to college? It's just not a sustainable thing right now. And I guess I just want to share kind of a picture of what it is like for me and my kids. And to be frank, making sure they go to college is a priority for me. It's very important that my kids go to college. Education is a doorway to opportunity, but so many kids, my kids' friends, can't go to college because they can't afford it. They can't go to their school of choice because it's out of reach. There's just not enough support. And, you know, to top it off, something that this Student Loan Forgiveness Act, I don't know what it was called, did was it messed up family contribution calculations, so that if somehow my family was able to afford $20,000 to send my child to college, when I get a second child in college at the same time, remember I have a sophomore and a freshman, those kids, now I suddenly maybe have 20,000 for both of them at the same time. So now I magically manifested 40 grand a year, which is, I mean, just do the math on that, and it becomes impossible for anyone who isn't
30 seconds, Alan.
healthy. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I mean, that's really what I want to share is, you know, the expected family contribution has done irreparable harm to families by changing, and there's a lot less doorways open for kids now. Remember, they all got 2 years of high school or junior high or whatever stolen from them during COVID. Like, do we prioritize education, or do we prioritize university profits?
Thank you, Alice. Appreciate that. Have a good day. I see that we have Galaxy A20.
Yeah, I
About
just
5
wanted,
minutes left.
we have 5 minutes left. This is final call for anyone that had a scheduled time slot or on the wait list today that was notified to please sign in. We will be ending this session promptly at 4 p.m. In the meantime, I'm going to try Galaxy A20 one more time.
All right.
It looks like they're having trouble with their audio. not seeing audio.
Oh, can you hear us, Galaxy A20? It's still trying to connect. Still not connected. All right, we have 2 minutes left before our.
Yeah, let's move on and wrap it up with any final comments for from the negotiators or department.
Okay. All right, folks. We've got a minute or two before we are set to finish. I appreciate the conversation today. I don't know if there's anyone that would like to make a parting comment. If not, I know that we have dates on the book. I believe it's November 6 and 7. Share. You're getting the last comment. Go ahead.
Yes, I'd just like to raise up and say that the public comment today reflects much of the conversation that we've been having over the or themes that keep getting repeated in the conversations that we've had as a negotiating committee over the last 2 days. One, that there are problems with the PSLF program, Parent Plus and loans for parents are still an issue. There's an issue with seniors, and there's also issues for people with chronic health conditions, including those with disabilities. So I want us to leave here today, and as we go into our debrief, we're talking about buckets today of borrowers, thinking about, who has been consistently held up and brought to the forefront as we consider in our deliberations, and for the DOE to consider as they prepare the document for our review going forward.
Thank you, Cher. And with that, we have reached our end time for the day. Thank you very much, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you in November.
Thanks, everybody.